Talk to me about cost, though, here, because there is an issue. A lot of this stuff is pricey. If you're paying for a family to get into a visitor attraction, it is not cheap. Are you seeing people have to find stuff that's a bit more affordable? And I imagine a walk under a big concrete motorway is slightly more affordable than, say, a day out at a theme park.
Well, that's undoubtedly true. I mean, when we came out of the pandemic, we went straight into a cost of living crisis, and that affected businesses as well as individuals. So the cost of living crisis has had an effect. People are being more tactical about how they spend their leisure pounds and their leisure hours, but they're still prioritising going out with families for special moments at special places with special people. So that hasn't gone away.
Bernard, good to talk to you there, boss at the Association of Leading Visitor Attractions. Thank you.
We'll be back with you very shortly with the headlines at 9 o'clock.
Live from London, this is BBC News. The leaders of the United States and Britain have ended talks at the White House with no public change to their policy of blocking Ukraine's use of long-range Western missiles against Russia. A former chief executive of the US chain Abercrombie & Fitch faces further allegations of sexually exploiting men at events he hosted around the world. And with London Fashion Week well underway, we speak to some of the Ukrainian designers showcasing their work on the catwalk this year. Hello and welcome, I'm Martine Croxall. Sir Keir Starmer says talks with President Biden in Washington have been wide-ranging and productive, but wouldn't say whether he'd persuaded the US to allow Ukraine to fire long-range missiles into Russia. President Zelensky has repeatedly called for permission to use the weapons on targets across the border. He claims it's the only way to end the war. Our political editor Chris Mason sent this report from the White House.
I think the next few weeks and months could be crucial.
What does President Biden make of Russia's threats against the West?
I don't think much about Vladimir Putin.
This is the Blue Room of the White House. The President, the Prime Minister and their team spoke here for about an hour and a half. The war in Ukraine dominated the conversation. Afterwards, Sir Keir Starmer wouldn't be drawn on whether he'd persuaded the President that authorising Ukraine to fire Western missiles at Russia was a good idea. Instead, he said,
well, there's only one reason we're having these discussions, and that is because Putin has illegally invaded Ukraine. The quickest way to resolve this, obviously, lies through what Putin actually does, because it's for him to end this. But we are having the discussion. We've stood with Ukraine. Ukraine has a right to self-defense. And we've stood united, not just with our allies here in the US, but across with our NATO allies. That's very, very important to us.
These are the long-range Anglo-French missiles Ukraine would love to fire into Russia. The UK making the argument to allies it's a request that should be granted. They rely on American satellite systems to work. You might ask why the Prime Minister has been so keen to dash here to visit a president who we know will be gone in just a few months' time. His answer is there are urgent issues that need addressing now, not least this question of missiles. The President has been sceptical about Ukraine being able to fire them into Russia, fearing it would be dangerous. This is the reality of the war grinding on in Ukraine, a country desperate for ongoing help, its allies weighing up how best to do it, and at what cost. Chris Mason, BBC News, in Washington.
Our North America correspondent Jenny Coomer has the latest from Washington.
We haven't had a huge amount of detail in terms of what was actually discussed, but there was a short statement that was issued, and that said that the Allies reaffirmed their unwavering support for Ukraine. They also expressed deep concern about Iran and North Korea's provision of lethal weapons to Russia and China's support of Russia's defence industrial base. Now, as we saw in Chris's report, Sir Keir Starmer gave a short interview after that meeting, and he refused to be drawn on whether a decision had been made to lift those restrictions on enabling Western missiles to strike deep into Russia. And he insisted that the discussion was wide-ranging, was about strategy and not about a specific capability. But for the Western allies, it's a delicate balance between deciding the impact of inaction versus action, and also what Russia's response would be to that.
Jenny Kumar. Let's speak to Dr. Nigel Gould-Davis, former UK ambassador to Belarus and a senior fellow at the International Institute for Strategic Studies. Ambassador, thank you very much for joining us here on BBC News. What do you make then of this certainly public announcement not to change strategy by the US and the UK?
Yes, my concern is that the diplomacy of this is really not being handled effectively or in an agile way. So what we've seen in recent days is a sort of steady drumbeat of growing expectation that this decision to relax the constraints that the West is imposing on the use of its weapons systems by Ukraine, those would be relaxed. We haven't had that now. It's been a very public kind of disagreement and disappointment. The better way to have handled this issue, I think, is to have these deliberations in private, to make the decision, which I think would be the right decision, quickly and quietly, to allow Ukraine to use its weapons in the way that it wishes, and not in the slow and public way. Doing it this way gives the momentum to Putin. It enables him to issue warnings, I think are bluffs, but some people may take them seriously, to try to deter the West from taking this step. In addition, what this slow and public delay has done is enable Russia to move its weapons systems out of range of these rockets, should they actually be usable by Ukraine. So this is not the way to make a military decision.
What might happen, though, behind the scenes? It's been very clear that this is the public statement, but in private, what could be happening?
Well, it seems there's more that we want to know, of course. The first indications are that the Biden administration, which I think is to some degree itself internally divided on this issue, has sort of pulled back from the brink of the decision. The public message, the public perception, and the perceptions are very important here, including the perceptions and lessons that Russia will take from this, is that the West is unwilling to take this step. And there's a real danger that Putin will be encouraged by the continued restraint that the West is imposing on itself, and that the lesson that Putin might draw is that if he issues such threats again, they will continue to be effective in deterring the West from supporting the Ukraine in the way that Ukraine needs.
Dr. Nigel Gould-Davis, former UK ambassador to Belarus, thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thank you.
Well, let's join our Kiev correspondent, James Waterhouse. What's the reaction been then from the Zelensky government to those talks in the US, James?
We haven't had anything official yet, but you can be sure there will be disappointment, continued disappointment, because as far as President Zelensky is concerned, this is a continued pattern for Ukraine. It asks the West for a certain level of support. The West says no over fears of a Russian escalation. Ukraine's position worsens in the war, and then the West finally says yes. The question over how Western missiles is used is merely an extension of that. Now it seems, after all of these sort of hopes and reports that there would be the green light from Washington, it seems Washington is worried about its own stockpile of weapons, of missiles, these ATACMS missiles, and they also don't believe they will make much of a difference. And despite the UK Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer saying they want to lead the way and give such permissions, it's the US which gives that kind of political cover for other allies to follow suit. So it is disappointing for Ukraine because it wants to use these missiles on Russian air bases where, as far as they're concerned, Russian bombers take off unchallenged and repeatedly strike Ukrainian cities. So I think we're going to see an extension of political disappointment, if you like.
But Ukraine is meant to be able to defend itself. Who decides what's self-defense and what isn't?
And here is the kind of, this is the rub, this is the subjective question, isn't it? President Biden a few months ago did lift restrictions. At one point, Ukraine wasn't able to hit anything inside Russia. So what Ukraine did was manufacture hundreds of its own drones to launch, but the damage they caused, significant in some areas with the targeting of power stations, superficial in others. We even saw impacts in Moscow where skyscrapers were damaged. But President Biden said, look, if it's within the realms of Ukraine defending itself and it's on sites which facilitate Russia's invasion and those sites are close to the border, then OK, you can use our weapons for that. But Ukraine wants to go further, and seemingly this is a line in the sand for now as far as the West is concerned. Vladimir Putin has said, look, this will put NATO and Russia in direct conflict. It's something he said before, and what MPs will tell you here is, look, he says this all the time. He is blackmailing the West because what they see going on is dithering politically.
James, thank you very much. James Waterhouse in Kiev. Since President Putin's full-scale invasion of Ukraine more than 2 years ago, there's been a crackdown in Russia on anyone expressing anti-war views. It's revived grim memories of the Soviet past when denouncing colleagues and neighbours was widespread. Our Russian editor, Steve Rosenberg, reports.
Nadezhda Buyanova is a doctor, but you'll find her in court, not the clinic. The 68-year-old paediatrician faces 10 years in prison, accused of spreading fake news about the Russian army. Nadezhda tells me, I read about this kind of thing happening to others. I never imagined it would happen to me. The story began at this Moscow medical center. A patient's mother claimed that the doctor had told her Russian soldiers in Ukraine are legitimate targets. The woman recorded an angry video. Her ex-husband had been killed fighting in Ukraine. Then she wrote this denunciation of the doctor to police. It was enough to put her on trial. 400 miles away, different trial, same charges. Near St. Petersburg, hairdresser Anna Alexandrova had fallen out with her neighbour Irina over a plot of land in their village. Their family feud led to Anna being reported and accused of posting messages critical of the war in Ukraine. She faces up to 15 years in prison. Any regrets from the other side? I feel sorry for her, says Irina's mother, Natalia. I don't want her to get a long sentence. I want her to receive a just punishment, says Irina. Across the country, there are reports of Russians informing on Russians.
One thing Russia's war in Ukraine has done here is turbocharge the hunt for internal enemies, for alleged traitors. And it's in this atmosphere of us against them that you get neighbour snitching on neighbour, students informing on their teachers, professors on students, and even parishioners denouncing priests.
But one thing Stalin did not give them, their freedom.
Sounds familiar. Under Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin, denunciation was actively encouraged. The prison camps, the Gulag, were full of victims who'd been snitched on by their fellow citizens.
What I find really remarkable is how quickly Russian genetic memory has come back. how things that people who didn't live in those times suddenly act as if they did. Suddenly they are squealing on others. Yes, it is a Soviet practice, but it's also something about the Russian genetic code of fear, of trying to protect themselves at the expense of others.
And in this atmosphere, look what's happening. Some Russians are taking the law into their own hands. On a Moscow bus, two men attack 87-year-old Dmitry Grinchin. They say they overheard him insulting Russian mercenaries fighting in Ukraine.
He lunged at me, flashing his eyes and gnashing his teeth, as if he wanted to bite me. He called over his son, a big guy, who pressed his finger into my arm to hurt me. I've got bruises here and here.
The two men forced Dmitry off the bus and dragged him to the police. He wasn't charged, but the incident has left Dmitry shaken and angry.
The Russian constitution says that everyone has the right to free speech. Why should others get to say what they think and not me?
Under Stalin, Dmitry's father was arrested and executed, an innocent man. Russia's past is a painful one, but it's the present that worries Dmitry, with Russia once again searching for enemies and agents and heading in a dangerous direction. Steve Rosenberg, BBC News, Moscow.
In the US, the fallout of Tuesday's presidential debate between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris is still being unpicked. But when will we know how and if it affected voters' opinions? Anthony Salvanto is polling director at our US news partners, CBS.
If any, I think it'll be next week, towards the end of next week, and I'll tell you why. First is contextually, if you look at post-debate, immediate post-debate polls from 2016, from 2020, past years, you've mentioned there have been times when you saw winners or perceived winners of debates, including the fact that in 2016, a lot of people thought that Hillary Clinton was winning some of those debates. And ultimately, that didn't pan out when Election Day rolled around. So those polls have some value, but it's limited, number one. And number two, you have to remember that the audience for those debates is large, but it's often disproportionately older. And so as younger people, and we know they're getting their information from a lot of different sources, that's going to trickle out over days. They're going to be getting information from the internet, from family and friends, et cetera. So that takes a while to process. And that's why I think you want to see that measurement in a few days. But finally, let me say this. There isn't a lot of room to move in this electorate. In our polling, the numbers of people that we think are persuadable by even the most generous measure is less than 1 in 10, and it may be smaller than that. So the question is, how many of those people are really watching to be moved in one direction or another? And frankly, that number is fairly small. We'll see, but that's the context.
Anthony Salvanto from CBS. Meanwhile, Pope Francis has weighed in on the US election. Speaking to journalists on a flight from Singapore to Indonesia, the Pope said Trump's stance on immigration and Harris's views on abortion leave voters with a choice between the lesser of two evils.
Both are against life, whether it is the one who is chasing away migrants or the one that kills children. Both are against life. I cannot decide. I cannot say. I am not an American, and I will not be voting there. Expelling migrants, not giving them the possibility of working, not welcoming migrants, is a sin. It is grave.
The Ugandan Olympic athlete Rebecca Cheptegei, who was killed by a former boyfriend earlier this month, is being buried this morning in eastern Uganda. The service is taking place at her family's hometown, Bukwo. The athlete will receive full military honours, having been a member of the Ugandan Armed Forces. The 33-year-old marathon runner, who competed in the Paris Games this year, died after being doused with petrol and set alight. Her body was brought overnight from Kenya, where she lived and trained. Her death has renewed concern about the level of violence against women in Kenya. Her former partner has since died of his injuries. Let's speak to our senior correspondent, Anne Soy, who joins us now from the village of Bukwo. Anne, talk to us about what's taking place there today.
Right, this is the venue where the funeral service is about to get underway. Just down the road at the Council Hall of Bukwo District, councillors are currently meeting and they are moving a motion to name a road and a sports venue here in Bukwo after Cheptegei, somebody that they remember as being very friendly to the people here, who has inspired many children in this community to join athletics. And her death is a big blow, not just to her family, but to the entire community here.
Her death, Anne, has underscored the fact that there are high levels of violence against women in Kenya. What is being done to address that in light of Rebecca's death?
There have been a lot of conversations that are still ongoing about how women can be protected more, how athletes, elite athletes, because Cheptegei is the third to die in those circumstances in just 3 years. The conversations are all going about how they can be protected more. And this is a very crucial conversation that's happening in Kenya, where women lose their lives in the hands of people who are supposed to be loving them, so former lovers or current spouses or lovers. So this is a big issue in the country. 1 in 3 women, according to data, has been the subject of domestic violence in the country. So indeed, this death, very unfortunate, but it has cast a spotlight on that very important issue and just coming to the foreground of conversations in the country.
Anne, thank you very much. Anne Soy in Bukwo, Uganda. A former chief executive of the US fashion chain Abercrombie & Fitch is facing further allegations of sexually exploiting men at events he hosted around the world. Mike Jeffries and his British partner Matthew Smith are already defending a civil lawsuit which alleges they ran a sex trafficking operation. 20 men have now told the BBC they attended or helped organise sex events for Mr Jeffries between 2009 and 2015. The FBI is also investigating. A lawyer for Mr Jeffries has previously said his client denied wrongdoing. Mr Smith has never responded to requests for comment. If you'd like to find out more about this story, you can head to the BBC News website with the latest on what's been reported. The military leader of Myanmar has appealed for international help to deal with deadly floods which have hit large parts of the country. The military coup leader told government officials to contact foreign governments for rescue and relief aid. There are few officially confirmed details, but reports suggest at least 160 people have died in recent days, most in central and eastern Myanmar. Critics accuse the military government, which seized power in a coup 3 years ago, of continuing to attack civilians in rebel-held areas despite the floods. An 18-year-old man has been arrested on suspicion of murder after 3 people died in a tower block in Luton. All 3 victims were pronounced dead at the scene. Our reporter Vincent McAviney has more.
Police were called to this 15-storey tower block in Luton at 5:30 on Friday morning after concerns for the welfare of someone in one of the flats. When they arrived, police found 3 people with serious injuries who were then pronounced dead at the scene. An 18-year-old man was arrested near the flats and a weapon was recovered.
As a result of the inquiries that we completed, at a very early stage we've been able to identify and arrest an individual. That 18-year-old man is currently in custody at Luton Police Station.
Some neighbours were too afraid to leave their flats yesterday, not knowing what was going on and whether they were safe.
I woke up to my boys screaming in the morning and looking out the window, there's the police everywhere with guns, my boys are screaming. Nothing, like, couldn't imagine waking up to it.
Yeah, it's scary. It's not nice knowing that something's happened this serious and we don't know what's happened.
About 5:30 in the morning I heard the shouting and the police sirens, yeah. But from what I have heard, it is very gut-wrenching to hear something like that on your doorstep, definitely. Not nice at all. Very sad.
This is a nightmare because I'm a single mom. I have my coffee every morning in the balcony and I saw all the police cars and everything, and the nursery called me telling me that the nursery is going to be closed today, so I couldn't drop him off either.
Bedfordshire Police want to reassure residents that this was an isolated incident and there's no threat to the wider community. The victims have not yet been named. Vincent McAviney, BBC News.
It's Fashion Week here in London, and although the front row of a runway show couldn't be further from the front lines of Ukraine, a number of Ukrainian designers debuted their new collections in a special show, with a war veteran taking to the catwalk. Eamon McCarthy was there.
London Fashion Week is well underway, and we're here at the UA in UK Fashion Show, and it's all about celebrating and showcasing Ukrainian designers. There's 4 Ukrainian designers that are showcasing their collections, and we spoke to a few people involved about what it takes to get a show like this off the ground.
Sometimes it's very challenging, very creative, very passionate, and definitely it's my favorite brands. Yes, I love different brands around of the world, but in my heart, I'm very big patriot of our Ukrainian brands. That's why I can say that it's one of the best brands of the world. And all of them trying to do their best, and they make very good mix.
So the messages that by my presents, I want to show people that war is still going on, and it's really terrible what things are there in the country, and it has its impact on the fashion industry, on everything. And the second message is that I want to translate to people that still people who had injuries like me can participate in fashion shows, still can be passing these messages to people. And we want to tell the world that we're hoping that the war is going to end soon, and we want to tell people that it's not over, and don't forget that.
Ukrainian fashion and creativity all on display, but as well a message of hope here at London Fashion Week.
Eamon McCarthy reporting. Let's just remind you of our top story this hour and the British Prime Minister's talks with Joe Biden that have been taking place in Washington. Sir Keir Starmer said that talks had been wide-ranging and productive, but did not signal any decision on allowing Ukraine to use long-range missiles to hit targets inside Russia. The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has repeatedly called on Kiev's Western allies to authorise their use, with President Putin warning that such a decision would represent NATO's direct participation in the Ukraine war. Well, our political editor Chris Mason has been in attendance at those talks. You can read his analysis on the BBC News website.
Hello. Today certainly dawned on quite a chilly note across some southern areas. We had temperatures down in the low to mid single figures, but gradually through the course of the weekend, we're going to be seeing those temperatures on the rise. So it'll turn a little bit warmer. Still some rain across some northern areas, particularly so for Northern Ireland and Scotland today. Down to the fact that we've got low pressure sitting out towards the northwest. That will push this cold front gradually further east, but high pressure holds on further south. So plenty of dry, sunny weather for central and southern England, much of Wales too. That cloud that we had this morning tending to break up into the afternoon. Eastern Scotland holding on to some dry weather into the afternoon, but this band of rain will arrive across Northern Ireland and Western Scotland. The winds are going to pick up here too. And we're going to see temperatures generally the mid to high teens in the north, could be 19, 20 degrees down towards the south and east. Into the evening hours then, still dry towards the south. We've got this band of cloud and patchy light rain clearing out of Scotland and Northern Ireland, but that's going to be slow moving across northern England and North Wales to start the day. Most of us reasonably mild, still a little bit chilly overnight in the south. We're getting down into single figures again, but not quite as cold as it's been over the past few nights here. So Sunday's weather then. Band of cloud and slow moving on and off patchy rain across northern England, North Wales at times too. Either side of that, things are looking drier and brighter. There'll be a rash of showers just drifting gradually eastwards across Scotland, but they should clear away fairly quickly. So an improved day compared to today, more sunshine here. And in the sunshine down towards East Anglia and the southeast, 20 or 21 degrees. But for most of us, I think we'll be in the high teens. Now heading on into the new working week, and high pressure very much going to be dominating our weather right across the British Isles. So Monday, not much weather on the map, as you can see. We will have a little bit of mist, cloud and low fog here and there, but that should gradually lift and clear away. So some long spells of blue sky, lighter winds than there has been as well. So it's going to feel really pleasant. 20, 21 degrees in the south. Further north, we're still looking at the mid to high teens on Monday, but those temperatures will increase into the middle of the week as weather fronts are kept at bay, and we're going to be seeing The wind's increasingly coming in from an easterly direction, bringing us these orange colours you can see, this milder air mass, especially for central and southern areas. So looking ahead then, we're going to see temperatures in the south up to possibly the mid-20s through the middle part of the week. Typically the high teens, low 20s further north. But for all of us, a largely dry, settled spell of weather with some sunshine on the cards. Bye for now.
The art of good conversation is to say the right thing at the right time and in the right way. You have to be original, sympathetic, encouraging, and also keep an open mind. And you really do just need to sit back and listen.
Katty Kay meets with legendary Olympic champions to find out what it takes to reach the top.
Influential with me, Katty Kay. Watch on BBC iPlayer.
Get scared?
No, I don't get scared. I've covered many wars over many years.
It bothers me to think about North Korean surveillance. Anything left on a shred of paper or my laptop, could it put somebody else's life at risk?
It was always going to be a history-making election.
This is not the time to stumble over my words. My job is to expose how people are targeted because I'm a reporter who can do that.
Behind the Stories. Watch on BBC iPlayer.
The 2024 US election looks set to be one of the most extraordinary yet. Could there be further shocks ahead in this historic race to the White House? Get the latest headlines in the BBC News app. Get in-depth coverage on bbc.co.uk/news. Follow the story of the US election on BBC News.
This is BBC News, the headlines. The leaders of the United States and Britain have spoken of the importance of Ukraine winning its war against Russia during talks at the White House. But President Biden and Sir Keir Starmer gave no sign of changing their policy not to allow Kyiv to fire Western long-range missiles across the border into Russia. The former chief executive of the US fashion chain Abercrombie & Fitch is facing further allegations of sexually exploiting men at events he hosted around the world. Mike Jeffries and his British partner Matthew Smith are already defending a civil lawsuit which alleges they ran a sex trafficking operation. 2 US astronauts stranded in space for 8 months have said it was hard to watch their malfunctioning craft depart the International Space Station without them, but they were happy and trained to expect the unexpected. They've been speaking for the first time about the challenges of living in space. The leaders of the United States and Britain have spoken of the importance of Ukraine winning the war against Russia during those talks at the White House we've been reporting on. Well, the former head of the CIA, General David Petraeus, has been speaking to Ukrainecast about why he thinks President Putin is bluffing after he warned the West against allowing Ukraine to use long-range weapons to target Russia. Here's my colleague Lucy Hockings, who's been speaking to General Petraeus.
To move the needle, President Zelensky has for a long time. He's very grateful about the aid that has been committed so far militarily, but he wants better and stronger weapons. I know that you have supported for a long time the use of limited long-range missiles that can be used deep inside of Russia. But what do you believe the risks of that are, of that potential escalation?
Look, I think it's always right to be concerned about risks, and having actually sat at the Situation Room table in 3 4-star combat commands and also as a CIA director, it's a lot easier to stand here and question why it has taken so long for this decision. But I think at this point it has taken too long for the decision. I'm very hopeful that we will hear out of this summit today between the UK Prime Minister and the US President, we'll hear one of the deliverables will be a joint announcement that the restrictions on the use of Storm Shadow provided by the UK and the Army Tactical Missile System by the US have been lifted. This will enable these systems to range and take out air bases and locations from which the Russians have been launching planes and missiles that have done so much damage to so many of the areas, especially in eastern Ukraine. And I think that's hugely important. And I don't see this as enormously risky. I just don't see that.
You don't think that there's a possibility that Russia has now had the chance to actually prepare for this, for the lifting of restrictions, that they've moved their targets further away, that this is actually too little too late?
It's never too little too late, but it would have been better to have been done earlier and without this lengthy public discussion of the decision, because undoubtedly the Russians have assessed. They know the arcs of these systems, and they very likely have moved some of these, but they can't move them all, and they still will use some of these bases. They still will, again, their systems have range limits as well. And so I think this is a very important decision to enable the Ukrainians to get the full effect of these particular systems. And I'd also add again, I don't think there's huge, someone asked me, will Russia throw anything more at the Ukrainians? I said they've thrown everything they have at the Ukrainians. There's 6,000-pound glide bombs that are just hammering into Kharkiv, the second largest city, and other locations that are close to the border. As you know, they have systematically targeted the electrical generation and transmission infrastructure in Ukraine. It's going to be a very tough, long, hard, cold, and dark winter, I fear, for the Ukrainians. They're desperately trying to reestablish the generation capacity, but they can't do that. And of course, they even hit the major children's hospital that serves Kyiv. So I think, again, this is long overdue. I hope we'll hear it today, and I hope we'll allow the Ukrainians to use these weapon systems to their full effect.
So, General Petraeus, when President Putin says that this will mean that NATO is directly participating in the conflict, that this is a red line for Russia, are you saying that you think he's bluffing?
I am. Yeah, I think he has established innumerable red lines before. The Ukrainians and/or Western countries have crossed just about all of them. He's even rattled the nuclear saber, and so much so that his own biggest ally and partner, China, President Xi said, don't even think about that, as did Prime Minister Modi, an important customer in India for Russian crude oil and so forth. So no, I don't think there's anything more conventionally that he can actually do that he's not already doing. He's carrying out a barbaric, horrific campaign, not just against military targets, but against critical civilian infrastructure, and even, as I said, a children's hospital, an educational institution, rail terminal, and so forth. And again, I think this should be decided today, I hope, and announced, and I hope that the Ukrainians can immediately begin to use these systems to the entire range that they provide.
General David Petraeus. If you'd like to hear more of that interview of Lucy Hawkins talking to General Petraeus, you can find the latest episode of Ukrainecast available now on BBC Sounds. Argentina's libertarian leader has warned of tough action against pilots who've gone on strike at the national airline. Pilots and cabin crew launched a 24-hour strike, forcing the cancellation of hundreds of flights. Almost 40,000 passengers in Argentina and elsewhere have been affected. Union leaders say the salaries of aviation sector workers have lost 40% of their value due to hyperinflation since President Javier Milei came to power in December. Party conference season is kicking off with the Liberal Democrats conference in Brighton. It's the first time they've come together since winning 72 seats in Parliament, a record for the party. They want to use their parliamentary presence to call for urgent measures to tackle the NHS crisis and improve social care. Our political correspondent Hannah Miller reports.
The Lib Dems are arriving in Brighton in a mood that matches the weather. After celebrating their best ever general election results, the party's the third biggest in Parliament, and some of its members are here as MPs for the first time.
The mood is so upbeat, it is so buoyant, but we're really determined to get stuff done. So the reason why we fight elections, why we win elections, is so that we can achieve things for our community. So I'm excited to be talking about our plan for fixing social care and the health service and how we really represent our communities, be that strong, determined opposition to the government and represent our communities the best possible way we can.
The Liberal Democrats achieved record election results by pitching themselves in opposition to the Conservatives, raising the question of what to do now that Labour are in government. The party says it wants to offer a constructive opposition, challenging ministers on policies they don't like, such as the recent cut in the winter fuel allowance. And they want to use this platform to put forward their own ideas too, with a focus today on health and social care.
Fixing social care is going to be critical to helping the NHS. We have to help the NHS, but we also have to get social care back on its feet so we can get people out of hospital, back to work, get the economy growing again. And that was a bit of the elephant in the room on Thursday when Wes Streeting was making a statement, because it can't be done without fixing social care.
And among the policies, could there be another stunt like those Ed Davies become famous for? This is, after all, a party that's proved it knows how to have a good time. Hannah Miller, BBC News, Brighton.
And we can join Hannah at the party conference right now. Hannah.
Morning, Martine. Yes, a gloriously sunny morning here in Brighton, and I'm joined by the new MP for Cheltenham, Max Wilkinson. Morning. Thank you for being here. Say new MP. You've been it for, what, a couple of months or so now?
2 months. It still feels very new, though.
Yeah. What's it like being here at party conference as an MP for the first time?
Well, firstly, it's extremely bright and sunny up here on the roof in Brighton. A lovely place to be, and there's loads of shiny, happy faces around here. Liberal Democrats are in good form. We've got 72 members of Parliament. That's the most we've ever had. And the queue outside to get into the conference this morning was really, really long. So everyone's feeling very positive about our role that we've got, being constructive opposition to the government and being constituency MPs all up and down the country.
What do you hope to get out of this conference?
Well, I think we're going to be talking about that role that we can play as a constructive opposition to the government. We're going to be talking about those key themes that we were raising in our constituencies and nationally during the general election. So that's fixing health and social care, making sure we're doing the right thing by the environment and fighting the sewage scandal, and looking after the cost of living as well. And so much aside from that as well. In the Lib Dem conference, we make our policies and we have really interesting discussions and fringe events all weekend. So it's just really wonderful to be here.
And one of the things that the Liberal Democrats have already done, perhaps the most vocal opposition that you've had so far, has been to that cut to the winter fuel allowance. Ultimately, it didn't actually make any difference, did it?
Well, it did make a difference because we were voted in by our constituents up and down the country to do the right thing, and we saw that the winter fuel payment cuts that the government is planning to make were going to do a lot of harm to some of our most vulnerable people, and I was really proud to walk through those division lobbies to vote to protect pensioners. Now, constructive opposition is what we need to do, but it's important to recognise that also this government has inherited a massive challenge from the last government. The Conservatives left this country in a real state. But as Liberal Democrats, where we do have difference with the government, we will make those clear, and the winter fuel allowance payment vote was one of those occasions.
And I have to ask you before we go, Ed Davey, your leader, was very famous during the campaign for all the stunts that he was doing. Do you think we're going to see any more of those this weekend?
Well, I hope so. I've heard some rumours that there might be some interesting and fun and exciting things. When Ed Davey came to Cheltenham, we did aqua aerobics at Cheltenham Lido, and during the campaign I took part.
Did you get involved?
I did, yeah. I even bopped to ABBA in the shallows of Cheltenham Lido. That was a wonderful thing. It's a memory that I will cherish. And personally, I in some shin kicking in Cheltenham during the campaign with the world shin kicking champion who happens to live in Cheltenham. So politics is best done when it's got a smile on its face, but Liberal Democrats are also serious people, as we've proven up and down the country with the things we've been taking up on behalf of our constituents since we were elected. Everything from health and social care, and I've been raising the issues around our closed maternity department for births in Cheltenham, and I've got a debate coming up about that in Parliament in a few weeks' time. And we've really hit the ground running as members of Parliament, and I'm proud of what my colleagues have already achieved up and down the country in those 72 constituencies, and there's more to come over the next few years.
Thank you very much, Max. You mentioned the Lido there. We've got the sea just out here as well, though I'm not sure that we need to see Ed Davey in a wetsuit any more than we did during the election campaign. We'll see what he has in store when he arrives at conference later on this afternoon. Back to you.
I'm sure there'll be a surprise for us. Hannah, thank you very much. Hannah Miller in Brighton. The 2 US astronauts stranded in space for 8 months have said it was hard to watch their malfunctioning craft depart the International Space Station without them, but they were happy and trained to expect the unexpected. Palab Ghosh reports.
Ignition and liftoff of Starliner and Atlas V.
Butch and Sonny blasted off for the International Space Station at the beginning of June. It was an 8-day mission. But 3 months on, they're still in space.
We have you loud and clear. How us?
This is their first press conference to answer questions about how they feel about being stuck in space.
You asked what we miss, right? Of course, you know, the things that we always miss, our families. I miss my 2 dogs. I miss my friends. But you know what? Like Butch said, there are so many people on Earth that are sending us messages, and it makes you feel just right at home.
Butch and Sonny left Earth with leaks in the propulsion system. Some of the thrusters cut out during docking. They arrived safely, greeted with the usual hugs, but engineers wanted to get to the bottom of the thruster problems before bringing them home. They never did. So do they feel let down by Boeing, who made the Starliner spacecraft?
Let down? Absolutely not. We are pushing the edges of the envelope in everything that we do, and it is not easy.
Starliner is now backing away from station.
Starliner returned to Earth last week without Butch and Sonny. Boeing said it would be completely safe for them, but NASA overruled them, and the astronauts said for the first time that they agreed.
We found some things that we just could not get comfortable with, putting us back in the Starliner when we had other options. We could have gotten to the point, I believe, where we could have returned on Starliner, but we just simply ran out of time.
Butch and Sonny seem to be enjoying life on the space station.
This is my happy place. I love being up here in space. It's just fun. You know, every day you do something that's work, quote unquote. You can do it upside down.
Sonny and Butch are working with the rest of the space station crew with experiments, maintenance and having fun. Palab Ghosh, BBC News.
One of England's largest school academy chains is set to become the first of its size to ban mobile phones for its pupils. The Ormiston Academies Trust says it started phasing out access to smartphones for its 35,000 students during the school day because of what it calls the catastrophic impact on children's mental health and learning. Some parents in Shropshire in the West Midlands are concerned smartphones could be bad for their children's development, so they've decided to test out phones that have no access to the internet. Our reporter Joanne Riddle has been to meet them.
In the 80s, yuppies posed with huge mobile phones, but no one was glued to screens. In fact, their phones didn't even have screens. They were purely for making calls. Imagine that. Fast forward to today, and 10-year-old twins Imogen and Toby and their pals are going retro. They have feature phones, which are basically a smaller version of the old brick phone with no access to the internet.
We can call and text loads and it's really good. There are games and you can call and you can text, but there isn't any internet. At first, I generally didn't want one because I thought everyone's going to make fun of me. Everyone's going to think I'm just weird for having one. At first, I was a bit really angry at Mum, but now I'm really like it, as now basically all my friends have one. When I found out that my friends got one, that made me happy because I knew I could. I said to my mum, "Oh, can I have one?" And she was like, "Sure." So yeah.
So instead of scrolling through social media, they spend more time playing at home in Shrewsbury. Their parents are part of a growing movement called Smartphone-Free Childhood.
This movement is not about judging parents who've made decisions in the past when they didn't have enough information available to them.
Harry has a feature phone and it's worth about £50 rather than an iPhone which is £600 or £700.
The group wants parents to sign a pact not to buy their children smartphones until they're 14. There are more than 120,000 members across the country.
You don't want them to be bullied for not having a smartphone, but at the same time, you don't want to expose them to all of the risks that come with smartphones. It's the exposure to harmful content. It's the addictive element of smartphones.
The children here are happy with their internet-free phones, but Tess admits their reaction wasn't great initially.
Because nobody else had a feature phone at that time, and it was, "Mum, it's not fair."
Her hope is that simpler phones will become a social norm for children under 14. Joanne Riddle, BBC News.
A 9-year-old boy who was given a 1% chance of survival after being shot in the head as a toddler is preparing to walk just over 3 miles to raise money for the hospital that saved him. Harry was shot with an air pistol and his life was saved by Bristol Children's Hospital. Cheryl Dennis reports.
It's hard to believe now that 8 years ago, Harry was given just a 1% chance of survival. At 18 months old, he was shot in the head with an air rifle.
It's just a miracle, you know, the fact that Harry was given such a small percentage of survival, and the fact he can still run around and be a happy child now, you know, despite all of his disabilities he's got, he's still happy, and that's what counts.
The bullet is still lodged in his brain. It means Harry is partially blind, has epilepsy and a weakness in his left side.
You'll lose me in all these bubbles.
We had to teach him how to eat again. We had to teach him how to speak again. We had to teach him how to walk again.
Look at that one, that's the highest!
Yet he is an energetic, happy 9-year-old who loves cars.
We were given, you know, the worst possible news when it came down to Harry. He's reached all these milestones now. Like, I remember during COVID, he picked up a book and read for the first time, and it was so emotional to be there and go through that. It was tears of joy, but he doesn't let it beat him up or get him down at all. He's a little superhero.
Harry's life nearly ended after a man put an air gun to his head to stop him crying. He claimed he didn't know it was loaded and was sentenced to 2 years in prison. Now this miracle boy has a new mission. He and Dad Ed are in training for the Grand Appeal's Grand Walk.
To raise money for the Children's Hospital, from the ward which saved my life, to help kids, and because they helped me.
The ward that means so much is the Bluebell ward, which does brain surgery.
There were some very dark times on that ward. Very, very dark times. But also there was a lot of good, because that's where Harry started reaching his milestones again and turning back into the little boy we once knew. And the staff there, they were absolutely incredible.
Tomorrow's 5K walk will be another milestone for Harry.
He's an incredible little boy, full of energy, really talkative and chatty, and just can't wait to take on the 5K walk, which will be a challenge for him, but we know he's going to give it a great go.
He's been so reliant on his wheelchair for so long, so this is a huge undertaking for him to take on 5 kilometres, because it is a huge distance. I want people to take from Harry's story that there is hope. You know, if you're in hospital with your child suffering right now, there is hope, there is light at the end of the tunnel.
The 5K walk will be tough for Harry, but in the last 8 years, this little boy has blown everyone away, rising to every challenge he's had to overcome. Cheryl Dennis, BBC News, Bristol.
We'll be rooting for him, won't we? It's almost all over. The festival, which aims to bring the best classical music to the widest possible audience, ends tonight with last night of the BBC Proms. Along with all the traditional second half favourites, the programme features works by Puccini, Fauré, along with Henry Mancini's famous theme to the Pink Panther. What's billed as the world's biggest music party also is including a performance by one of the UK's best-loved pianists, Sir Stephen Hough, who performs Saint-Saëns Piano Concerto No. 5. Well, we're pleased to say that we're joined by Sakari Aramo, Chief Conductor of the BBC Symphony Orchestra. Sakari, thank you for joining us here on BBC News. How has the season panned out in your view?
It's been a fantastic prom season. I think the feelings have been really elevated this year, and also audience number have grown significantly and are almost up to capacity now. And the Albert Hall is a very big venue. Of course, there are concerts also in other venues around the UK, but I can speak for everyone. I think it's been a really good season.
When you approach last night of the Proms, what's going on in your mind? Because it's steeped in tradition that you have to respect, but you don't want it to become stale, do you?
No, and of course, I'm an outsider because I come from Finland, so I've kind of gradually found my way into this tradition and the very big event that last night with the Proms is. I think this is a balance between evolution and revolution, if you like. And the choice of program, of course, reflects always different themes that have been prevalent during the year that has passed.
So what can people look forward to tonight that they might not be expecting of the last night?
Well, there will be a fantastic amount of music, of course, all great music. There's a world premiere by the composer Carlos Simon called Hellfighters Blues, which is a nod to the Black American people that first brought jazz to Europe after the First World War, and of course when the Spanish flu was also raging around the continent. So it's like a nod to those people over 100 years ago now. But there's also a myriad of other things. We're playing William Walton's fantastic Portsmouth Point and so on.
Tell us about the guest artists, particularly Sir Stephen Hough and Angel Blue. If people aren't familiar with them, what's in store?
Yes, Angel Blue is an American soprano. She sings music by Puccini and also a piece of Spanish zarzuela, which is kind of a Spanish operetta type of thing. And also, naturally, she will sing Rule Britannia as a soloist. And Sir Stephen Hough is one of Britain's internationally best-known classical music artists. He's a pianist, and he will play a piece by Camille Saint-Saëns, but also some of his own arrangements of spirituals together with Angel Blue.
It sounds then that proms are in very good health. Why do you think they are doing so well when there's so much competition from other forms of music and other entertainment?
Indeed, I think the proms have sort of built up a special value, both here in the UK and in London, but also worldwide. It's a brand that is so well known, and I think it's one of the BBC's best known brands around the world. I think the accessibility is the key word there, and that was the original idea that Sir Henry Wood, over 130 years ago, when he founded the proms, actually wanted to point out accessibility.
But even these days, though, with that accessibility, it can be an off-putting genre, can't it, classical music? Where would you advise people to start if they're interested in finding out more?
Well, I mean, it's not about knowing things about classical music. It's more like letting the music come to you. And no matter what you listen to, I mean, you can listen to, the best loved pieces of classical music, Beethoven symphonies or whatever you feel like, but it's really to let the music create the emotions that it creates. And it can be individual for everyone. Everyone experiences music in different ways. And yeah.
Sakari Arama, I'm delighted to talk to you this morning. Have a fantastic time at last night at the proms. Thanks for being with us on BBC News.
Hello. Today certainly dawned on quite a chilly note across some southern areas. We had temperatures down in the low to mid single figures, but gradually through the course of the weekend, we're going to be seeing those temperatures on the rise. So it'll turn a little bit warmer. Still some rain across some northern areas, particularly so for Northern Ireland and Scotland today. Down to the fact that we've got low pressure sitting out towards the northwest. That will push this cold front gradually further east, but high pressure holds on further south. So plenty of dry, sunny weather for central and southern England, much of Wales too. That cloud that we had this morning tending to break up into the afternoon. Eastern Scotland holding on to some dry weather into the afternoon, but this band of rain will arrive across Northern Ireland and Western Scotland. The winds are going to pick up here too. And we're going to see temperatures generally the mid to high teens in the north, could be 19, 20 degrees down towards the south and east. Into the evening hours then, still dry towards the south. We've got this band of cloud and patchy light rain clearing out of Scotland and Northern Ireland, but that's going to be slow moving across Northern England and North Wales to start the day. Most of us reasonably mild, still a little bit chilly overnight in the south. We're getting down into single figures again, but not quite as cold as it's been over the past few nights here. So Sunday's weather then, band of cloud and slow moving on and off patchy rain across Northern England, North Wales at times too. Either side of that, things are looking drier and brighter. There'll be a rash of showers just drifting gradually eastwards across Scotland, but they should clear away fairly quickly. So an improved day compared to today, more sunshine here. And in the sunshine down towards East Anglia and the southeast, 20 or 21 degrees. But for most of us, I think we'll be in the high teens. Now heading on into the new working week, and high pressure very much going to be dominating our weather. right across the British Isles. So Monday, not much weather on the map, as you can see. We will have a little bit of mist, cloud and low fog here and there, but that should gradually lift and clear away. So some long spells of blue sky, lighter winds than there has been as well. So it's going to feel really pleasant. 21 degrees in the south. Further north, we're still looking at the mid to high teens on Monday, but those temperatures will increase into the middle of the week as weather fronts are kept at bay, and we're going to be seeing the winds increasingly coming in from an easterly direction, bringing us these orange colours. You can see this milder air mass, especially for central and southern areas. So looking ahead then, we're going to see temperatures in the south up to possibly the mid-20s through the middle part of the week. Typically the high teens, low 20s further north. But for all of us, a largely dry, settled spell of weather with some sunshine on the cards. Bye for now.
I became a tech journalist because I wanted to tell stories about technology. That sounds obvious, but as a disabled person, your life is filled with all sorts of assistive tech. My first ever proper TV presenting gig was about prosthetic running blades.
Even with all the training in the world, I don't think I'm ever going to be fit enough to compete with these guys.
Assistive tech in the last 20 years has absolutely transformed from something that was very basic to science fiction. It's completely mind-blowing.
This is one of the most incredible things I've ever done.
The Paris Olympics truly are pushing the envelope in terms of technology and how it's being deployed.
We've got blood, we've got sweat. If I was doing this, we'd definitely have the tears as well.
It's really important for journalists to bring their own experience to the stories that they cover. But just because I'm a disabled person doesn't mean that I should only ever cover stories to do with disability. And that's a very fine line to tread, but hopefully I'm getting it right.
Live from London, this is BBC News. The leaders of the United States and Britain have ended talks at the White House with no public change to their policy of blocking Ukraine's use of long-range Western missiles against Russia. A former chief executive of the US chain Abercrombie & Fitch faces further allegations of sexually exploiting men at events he hosted around the world. And with London Fashion Week well underway, we speak to some of the Ukrainian designers showcasing their work on the catwalk this year. Hello and welcome, I'm Martine Croxall. Sir Keir Starmer says talks with President Biden in Washington have been wide-ranging and productive, but wouldn't say whether he'd persuaded the US to allow Ukraine to fire long-range missiles into Russia. President Zelensky has repeatedly called for permission to use the weapons on targets across the border. He claims it's the only way to end the war. Our political editor Chris Mason has sent this report from the White House.
I think the next few weeks and months could be crucial.
What does President Biden make of Russia's threats against the West?
I don't think much about Vladimir Putin.
This is the Blue Room of the White House. The President, the Prime Minister and their team spoke here for about an hour and a half. The war in Ukraine dominated the conversation. Afterwards, Sir Keir Starmer wouldn't be drawn on whether he'd persuaded the President that authorising Ukraine to fire Western missiles at Russia was a good idea. Instead, he said,
Well, there's only one reason we're having these discussions, and that is because Putin has illegally invaded Ukraine. The quickest way to resolve this, obviously, lies through what Putin actually does, because it's for him to end this. But we are having the discussion. We've stood with Ukraine. Ukraine has a right to self-defense. And we've stood united, not just with our allies here in the US, but across with our NATO allies. That's very, very important to us.
These are the long-range Anglo-French missiles Ukraine would love to fire into Russia. The UK making the argument to allies it's a request that should be granted. They rely on American satellite systems to work. You might ask why the Prime Minister has been so keen to dash here to visit a president who we know will be gone in just a few months' time. His answer is there are urgent issues that need addressing now, not least this question of missiles. The President has been sceptical about Ukraine being able to fire them into Russia, fearing it would be dangerous. This is the reality of the war grinding on in Ukraine, a country desperate for ongoing help, its allies weighing up how best to do it, and at what cost. Chris Mason, BBC News in Washington.
Our North America correspondent Jenny Kumar has the latest from Washington.
We haven't had a huge amount of detail in terms of what was actually discussed, but there was a short statement that was issued, and that said that the Allies reaffirmed their unwavering support for Ukraine. They also expressed deep concern about Iran and North Korea's provision of lethal weapons to Russia and China's support of Russia's defence industrial base. Now, as we saw in Chris's report, Sir Keir Starmer gave a short interview after that meeting, and he refused to be drawn on whether a decision had been made to lift those restrictions on enabling Western missiles to strike deep into Russia. And he insisted that the discussion was wide-ranging, was about strategy and not about a specific capability. But for the Western allies, it's a delicate balance between deciding the impact of inaction versus action, and also what Russia's response would be to that.
Jenny Kumar. More now from our correspondent in Kiev, James Waterhouse, who has more on how this has been received in Ukraine.
You can be sure there will be disappointment, continued disappointment, because as far as President Zelensky is concerned, this is a continued pattern for Ukraine. It asks the West for a certain level of support. The West says no over fears of a Russian escalation. Ukraine's position worsens in the war, and then the West finally says yes. The question over how Western missiles is used is merely an extension of that. Now, it seems, after all of these sort of hopes and reports that there would be the green light from Washington, it seems Washington is worried about its own stockpile of weapons, of missiles, these ATACMS missiles, and they also don't believe they will make much of a difference. And despite the UK Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer saying they want to lead the way and give such permissions, it's the US which gives that kind of political cover for other allies to follow suit. So it is disappointing for Ukraine because it wants to use these missiles on Russian air bases where, as far as they're concerned, Russian bombers take off unchallenged and repeatedly strike Ukrainian cities. So I think we're going to see an extension of political disappointment, if you like.
James Waterhouse in Kiev. Let's speak to Kurt Volker, former US ambassador to NATO, as well as a former US special representative for Ukraine. Kurt Volker, thank you for joining us here on BBC News. To what extent is Ukraine's frustration justified?
Well, I think it is incredibly justified because they are fighting a war for survival, and Russia is attacking them from bases across Russia. And essentially, we're telling Ukrainians, don't hit back. They should have sanctuary inside Russia. That's an unacceptable position overall, and I think that is justified. And now, what may happen here is some of this may get loosened up behind the scenes. You may see the U.S. not object to the UK allowing the Storm Shadows to go. You may see some shift in U.S. position, but just not announced as some sort of new policy. But the Ukrainian frustration is palpable, and I think it is justified.
But we've still got the concern of the United States and the UK, we're told, that to allow the use of these weapons in this way to target spots inside Russia would lead to an escalation. How likely is that escalation?
Yeah, I think that is a narrative that Russia has pushed and pushed in order to influence Western behavior. If Putin were able to escalate today, he would. He's not holding back because we're not doing something. He's actually trying to destroy Ukraine and take over the country, and he's not able to. I don't think that he is willfully holding back and doing only half measures. He's trying to win this war, and we need to recognize that. The second is Russia is not a victim here. No one should be concerned about Ukraine defending itself by striking back inside Russia. We seem to have distorted the perceptions here that it's somehow not fair for Ukraine to hit Russia. It really makes no sense.
To what extent, though, is it too late? That we're told that Russia will have moved some of these potential targets so that they're out of reach even for these long-range missiles?
Well, there are a lot of targets that can't be moved. We're talking about air bases, airfields, fuel depots, distribution lines, logistical supply lines. These are things that are fixed. And according to the Institute for the Study of War, which has looked at particular targets, there's well over 200 that can't be moved. In addition to that, forcing Russia to actually move things, to get away from where the potential strikes would be a benefit to Ukraine. It would make it more difficult, less predictable for how Russia could conduct its attacks. So that is itself a virtue. Short
of currently granting the permission that Zelensky is seeking, how else can the West best bolster Ukraine's military?
Well, the number one thing that has been discussed here in Kyiv this weekend is air defense. Air defense is the principal thing affecting the economy, the energy grid, the local population, transportation. Everything is impacted by air defense. And what we need to do is increase our capacities to assist Ukraine with air defense. One of the things that I think should be done, and done as soon as possible, is for the bordering states, Poland and Romania in particular, to ask Ukraine if they can extend their own air defense coverage into Ukrainian airspace in order to protect NATO territory and populations. Just this week, we saw Russia strike a ship inside Romanian economic waters. It's the exclusive economic zone of Romania. That is an unacceptable escalation by Russia of attacks inside NATO territory. We've already had examples of missiles and drones flying through Polish and Romanian airspace, and 2 Poles were killed last year from falling debris. So it is well within reason for NATO to say we need to take out these things if they are close to our borders. And I'm sure Ukraine would welcome that.
Kurt Volker, former US ambassador to NATO, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Since President Putin's full-scale invasion of Ukraine more than 2 years ago, there's been a crackdown in Russia on anyone expressing anti-war views. It's revived grim memories of the Soviet past when denouncing colleagues and neighbours was widespread. Our Russia editor, Steve Rosenberg, reports.
Nadezhda Buyanova is a doctor, but you'll find her in court, not the clinic. The 68-year-old paediatrician faces 10 years in prison, accused of spreading fake news about the Russian army. Nadezhda tells me, I read about this kind of thing happening to others. I never imagined it would happen to me. The story began at this Moscow medical center. A patient's mother claimed that the doctor had told her Russian soldiers in Ukraine are legitimate targets. The woman recorded an angry video. Her ex-husband had been killed fighting in Ukraine. Then she wrote this denunciation of the doctor to police. It was enough to put her on trial. 400 miles away, different trial, same charges. Near St. Petersburg, hairdresser Anna Alexandrova had fallen out with her neighbour Irina over a plot of land in their village. Their family feud led to Anna being reported and accused of posting messages critical of the war in Ukraine. She faces up to 15 years in prison. Any regrets from the other side? I feel sorry for her, says Irina's mother, Natalia. I don't want her to get a long sentence. I want her to receive a just punishment, says Irina. Across the country, there are reports of Russians informing on Russians.
One thing Russia's war in Ukraine has done